And resilience is a huge thing in life and in career. Yeah, being able to. Well, actually, I think the other really important thing to say is it's not a trait. So it's not something that you either have or that you don't have. Like that person's so resilient, that person's not very resilient. It's actually a set of skills and capabilities that you can build up over time. So if you feel like, I'm not very resilient, you don't need to sort of give up in the sense that you can actually build those capabilities and build your resilience if you feel like that's something that will be beneficial for you.
Are you feeling lost in your career, or you want to have a greater impact but you don't know where to start? Welcome to Kinda Planned, the podcast where we help you unlock the opportunities that you can't plan for. Through engaging conversations with expert guests, we help you unlock the mindsets, strategies and tools that you need to build the career of your dreams. So subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm your host, Alex Cuttaford, and let's take a moment to unlock your next opportunity. Well, welcome back to another episode. Today I'm joined by Kate Brettell, and Kate is a leadership and wellbeing coach in Newcastle. Kate, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks, Alex. How are you doing?
I'm really good. Thanks for joining me. So really keen to jump in, have a chat with you today, hear a bit about your career journey and some of the work that you're doing now and what you're passionate about. So would you maybe just want to start by sharing a bit about your career journey and what's led you to what you're doing today?
Sure. So yeah, there's a bit of history now. I've been in a career for a little while, and it sort of certainly hasn't been a straight line. I've done a range of different things, but I started my career, my first career, I guess I should probably say, working in not-for-profits and NGOs, working in the area of international development. Yeah, focusing on working with communities, actually both here and overseas, but, supporting them around education and economic opportunities and health and that sort of thing. So I did that for a couple of years. I worked for an organisation that sent volunteers overseas to work on projects. That was a lot of fun. I lived in Thailand working for an NGO. That was also lots of fun. And then, following that, when I was back in Australia, I spent some time teaching English as a second language to international students. So there's always been quite an international flavour in the things that I've done, and really have always been really curious and interested in other countries and cultures and people. So that was good. And then I sort of transitioned into probably the place that I have spent the longest, which was working in government in learning and organisational development. So I was there for like 11 years or so, and across that time did lots of different things. But I was really, I guess, ultimately responsible for delivering on projects that were about the learning of the individual, like employees in the department that I worked for, and also learning across the organisation. So building the capacity around leadership, early career graduates, that sort of thing, working with Aboriginal staff in the department as well, supporting their learning. And during that time, I think a couple of important things happened that have led me to where I am today. So during that period was when I did my first coaching training, probably over 10 years ago now, and then used that kind of informally in the work that I was doing there. Also at that time, I decided that I wanted to retrain as a psychologist. So I started that journey. I went back to uni and I studied part-time for quite a long time whilst I was working and had little kids. And then took a little bit of a detour, I guess, after that extended time there, because my family had an opportunity to move overseas. My husband was offered a role overseas in the Netherlands, and we thought that sounded like a wonderful adventure for the four of us, and so we moved overseas. And initially that gave me a real opportunity to take some time out and just really reflect on like what is important to me, and you don't get that many opportunities in your career necessarily to sort of step back and assess things. So that was, so I did that for a little bit while we sort of got accustomed to our new life there, and then decided to continue on the pathway of coaching. So I did some further training and certification there, and then I started working as a coach, and I guess, crossing a number of different spaces, career coaching, transition coaching. I guess I talked about it at the time as being because there were a lot of people who were coming to live in the Netherlands that weren't from there and dealing with transitions in their life and careers and things like that. And then when we came back to Australia about 3 years ago, started to really focus much more on the leadership and executive space, working in a range of organisations where I coach leaders and coach them around, I guess, their role as a leader, how they see themselves, what challenges they have in their roles, and how they can be effective, and how they can manage their teams, and lots of different areas come up. So I've worked with leaders in Australia and overseas in a range of different industries, which is really interesting. And then just this year, I'm continuing my psychology pathway. So I'm back doing my master's this year in professional psychology. So those two themes have been kind of interwoven for the last 10 years or so, the coaching and the psychology, and what that's going to look like on the other side. I'm not entirely sure, the combination of those two things, but I think definitely continuing with the things, the areas that have been important to me up to now.
What a cool career journey. Yeah, I'd need to see a map of that to see what countries you're in what years and how it all pieced together. But I'm sure there's been so many pieces along that journey that have all sort of shaped, the way that you work now and the way you see the world. Even I was even just thinking about, I'd be curious to hear like what sort of differences you sort of like starting your coaching in the Netherlands and then coaching here. Like, would you see different cultural approaches to like how people are grappling with things or working through challenges, or do you see a lot of the common human threads throughout the two cultures?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Look, I think I've coached people from, I haven't counted, but like a lot of different countries and cultures, and I think there's a lot that is common and human, as you just said. In essence, like, I find it really interesting that I can speak to people who are very senior somewhere, and then I can speak to people who may not necessarily have a role title as a leader, or people who are taking a career break or on parental leave or whatever, and there's a lot of commonality about the way. Not always the way people think about things, but about the sorts of things people are thinking about. People want to feel like what they're doing is important to them and fulfilling. They want to feel connected to the people around them. They want to have good relationships generally. And I guess what's different is we all come with our own histories and identities that are made up of the way we've been brought up, the culture and society we've been brought up in. And so that, I guess, does impact on the way that people think and approach these things, the responsibilities that people are carrying, the cultural considerations that are important for people are sometimes quite different. So I guess to answer your question, there's a lot that is the same, but then there definitely are things that are different. And I've learned a lot through that process because obviously I come with all of that stuff myself. So learning about it through the lens of other people's experience has been really fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what would you say you're most passionate about now in your leadership coaching? What are some of the areas that you really sort of focus in on?
Yeah. So I think one of the parts that I'm really passionate about leadership coaching. I think when people think about leadership coaching, they often are thinking about the title of having a role, in an organisation that is a leadership role. I guess what I'm passionate about, or one of the things I'm passionate about, is that you don't need to have a title or a role as a leader to lead. That there's lots of ways to lead, and so one of the things that I really focus on in the coaching that I do is personal leadership, or what does it look like to lead yourself? Because that's where everyone needs to start.
Yeah.
And so that's developing self-awareness. What are your values? What are your blind spots? What are your strengths? Understanding the patterns you have, the things that trigger you, the things that get in the way, and that serves someone who's in a formal leadership position, and it also serves people who might be leading from different parts of an organisation, or just leading in their lives, whatever that might look like. So that's one thing. Another thing I feel really passionate about is not whether you're a leader or not. I think that there's not often a lot of space for people to just unpack what's happening for them, whether that's in a role as a leader or what's happening for them in their lives from day to day, things that might be challenging. And so I really feel passionate about providing that space. It's a space that's non-judgmental, where we build trust and we can really unpack whatever might be happening. So, and I do that as a coach. I do that by asking lots of questions and really listening deeply to people, listening to what people say, listening to what people don't say, reflecting that back at them and helping them to perhaps sometimes see different perspectives. And I hear a lot particularly from leaders, that they don't often have that opportunity, certainly not within their organisations. It can sometimes be a lonely thing to play a role as a leader. So I really, they really seem to value, and I really am happy to be able to provide that to people. I guess one of the other things I'm really passionate about in the space of leadership is creating change in systems. So obviously I work with individuals, but I also work with systems, so with teams and in organisations. So the possibilities of creating change, not just for an individual, although individuals make up systems, but creating larger scale change across systems when you work with individuals, but also when you work with teams and at a larger scale. I'm pretty passionate about creating positive change, whether that's in an organisation or in systems outside an organisation. So that's great. And then the other feature which crosses my coaching and my psychology really is wellbeing. So wellbeing for looking after yourself and knowing what serves you and what wellbeing looks like for you, and how you can maintain that and nurture that when you're often in very complex roles, high demands, all of that sort of thing. And that's often a topic that comes up when I speak to leaders as well. So there's some of the things. Yeah.
All of those areas are ticking my curiosity and interest boxes. Particularly like on the leadership piece, because I often think about the piece of leading up, and it's like, if you have a leader, you have an opportunity to lead just by the fact that you have the opportunity to influence the people that might have more influence, or the ability to implement something that you hope to see. And if you can win that one person over, that could be the big sort of piece that unlocks something else, and you don't have to be the one that sends seed to be driving it or responsible for it. And so, that's definitely a space I try to operate in as much as I can, and probably almost feel more comfortable, or that my skill sets are better suited to that position of being close to a person of influence, not necessarily needing to be that person. And when you can feel comfortable in that place, you can actually be really effective, versus always trying to think, I need to get to that position before I can do the things or see the change that I want to see. And in fact, that might be the thing that actually ultimately gets you to those sorts of positions as well, when you do it well and tactfully and respectfully. And then also the systems piece. That's something I think about a lot, and the grapple between the influence you can have as an individual and then the influence that a system has, and bringing those two together as best as possible. It seems so hard if I were to, because I guess often the individual feels helpless to the system, and loses sight that they have any influence on the system, and then they just sort of roll over to it, and everyone, and then you see an organization that's everyone you talk to goes, oh, that's the process, we can't change it. And everyone's like, it seems like no one wants it, not even the leaders or the people implementing. It's like no one wants it, but everyone's saying that's how it is.
So, resigned.
So how do you navigate through that space? I know
that's a really good question. Look, I think there's a link between what I was saying about personal leadership and what I heard you just saying there was really about taking the view that you are a leader when you necessarily don't have a title or a role as a leader. And I think that's where that's one of the important things, and where it can start is if people take this view that it's possible to lead, it's possible to influence, even when I might not be in a positional leadership role, then that is such a shift in the way you engage with a system. Rather than sort of being resigned and I guess being a passive kind of part of a system. I think it really helps to understand how a system works, understand, how a system is set up to benefit some people and not others. When you can understand and kind of pull back the curtains on a system, to understand it more, you can sort of see where the levers are, and it can be helpful to do that work not only as an individual but in a group too. And raising your own awareness or raising the awareness of a group of people, and that's something that I've done in, for example, in leadership programs with women who are working in organisations. Helping them to understand, how does the system operate. How has your career been impacted by the system, in both potentially in positive and negative ways, and what does it look like for you to, I guess, be an active participant and influencer in that system? Like, what are the levers that you have access to? Is it possible to make changes in that system, and what does that look like? So I think, that to start with that view of self as being as an agent of change, someone who can engage with that system, understanding what that system actually looks like, how it works, how it operates, and what the levers are. And then sometimes building coalitions too within a system. So operating as one individual person can be quite difficult unless you have some positional influence in that system. So coming together with other people who are also interested in creating a system that benefits everyone across the system, not just only some people, can help to sort of pull your energies, pull your ideas, and just support each other too, because it's not always easy work to do.
No, definitely not. Systems inherently don't want to change. And that's an interesting thing that I've been learning, is that when you try to make changes to a system will often work to negate that change. So I was keen to think about that a bit, I guess, from the gender equality conversation. And when you think about that, systems plays a huge part of that, and whether someone has a positive or negative experience. And if we're talking about helping someone first understand what the system is, I guess what would be your perspective on that when thinking about like a gender equality in the workplace lens? Like, what are some of the systems um, that are in place there that sort of maybe positively or negatively impacting people, do you think?
Yeah. Uh, well, what are some of the systems in place positively and negatively impacting people? Well, I think a lot can be revealed when you bring parts of a system together and have them share their experiences with each other. So my experience has been in bringing groups together in an organisation and giving them an opportunity to share around a theme. For example, if you think about your career, where do you think where have things been difficult for you? Where have things helped you to accelerate in your career? And then having the opportunity to do that, but then also to hear that across a group and hearing some commonalities, that often reveals the system or reveals parts of the system anyway. So yeah, bringing people together to share it, because sometimes we're so busy operating in systems that we don't, I guess, pull back to take that more meta view and think about, okay, let's look at this picture overall and sort of try and examine what's happening here. Like, why do things work that way here, but this way there? And what might be at play there? I think also just gathering input from across a system too. Like if you're used to operating in one part of a system, then even within systems there's different ways of doing things, and you get used to that part of your system and don't always necessarily understand the experience of others. So I guess in the context of gender equality, I'm thinking I've coached lots of male leaders in the context of trying to increase female representation in leadership positions, for example. And they tell me that after they've heard the experience of women in their organisations and some of the barriers that they've faced, they have been quite shocked that it's actually still like that. That they understand sometimes what some of the barriers can be, but they don't necessarily know that those things are still being experienced in their organisations. So being open to kind of really listening and understanding and asking questions and being curious about the experience of other people in a system. Yeah.
Yeah. What would be some of the typical things that maybe a male leader hasn't experienced that it wouldn't even be on his radar without intentionally looking for it? Something that a female might have a common experience of. What are some of those?
Yeah. What do I hear? Well, I think a pretty common one is that women can often find, women and non-binary folk too. So I guess I want to acknowledge that there's more than two genders, and when we're talking about gender equality, we're not just talking about women. So the experience of people who are not male or not male appearing can sometimes be that they get interrupted or spoken over. I've lost count of the number of times that I've heard the story of someone presenting or a female presenting in a meeting their idea, and the meeting moves on and it's not acknowledged, and then sometime later in the meeting a male puts forward that idea and everyone's like, that's a great idea, we should do that, and it's more or less the same idea that's already been presented. So just being kind of interrupted and ideas not acknowledged and talked over and that kind of thing. I think there's a bit of a double bind for women in a system, in the workplace context, that for example, someone who speaks up a lot and can be forceful in the way that they communicate, if they are female, they might be labelled as pushy, or over the top or something like that. Whereas if that person, demonstrating those behaviours is male, sometimes they're, they might be labelled as having like great leadership potential, or being a good leader, for example. So the same behaviours can be reflected very differently depending on who's demonstrating them. Whereas, if a female is more collaborative and is not always the one speaking up, then they might be, seen as like not having leadership potential, if you know what I mean. So there is a bit of a double bind there, I think, for women, like what's the right way to operate to get to be acknowledged and things like that. So, something that I've definitely heard from women that I've coached before is they receive feedback, but often the feedback that they get is quite vague and not always actionable. So I've heard a lot. I was told I need to be more confident. And that's just a loaded word. Like, what does confidence mean? And who's telling you? Who's telling you to be more confident? And what do they mean by that? Rather than saying, giving them something actionable, like, I think you could build on your skills around negotiating when we're talking to clients or whatever. Something very specific that they could actually focus on. Yeah. So it gives the illusion that they're getting something helpful in terms of feedback, but actually it's not often that helpful at all. And they don't know, women don't know what to do with it. They ask me like, I don't know, what am I meant to do? So
I can just picture it, and it's like, you then go, okay, I'm going to go be more confident. And then you do what you think that means. And then they're like, and then you're getting told that's wrong. And then it's like, and then you try to do it again. No, that's wrong. And then you're this sort of people, you throw your hands up in the air going, I don't know how to make this person.
Yeah.
One of the ones that had said to me, because often, I guess, when I'm talking and in my content, I would often talk about the importance of self-advocacy. And then it was interesting for me when I was reading different articles about how a female might likely have a very different experience of self-advocacy than versus me being a white male. So that was just an interesting one for me just to remember and just sort of keep it there in the back of your mind of one experience, might not be the same for someone else. Yeah.
Yeah, and what that brings to my mind is the different experience of men and women being both mentored and sponsored. Women are typically over mentored and under sponsored, so they're getting a lot of advice given to them. Whereas, a sponsor being someone who's got some political influence in an organisation or some power and is willing to use it on your behalf, that happens much more often for men than it does for women. And, I guess one of the reasons for that is that we all carry unconscious biases, and we tend to, as humans, be biased towards people who look like us, sound like us, act like us. And so when there's already a discrepancy in the amount of, the spread of gender and diversity across leadership, if you've already got a lot of males and often white males in leadership roles, then if they're looking out for people who are, look like them, sound like them, act like them, then the people that they're going to be sponsoring are going to be people like them. So it takes some active redress of that. And also supporting women to understand what sponsorship is and the impact that it can have on their career, because it can be very impactful to have male or female someone sponsor you and someone be mentioning your name in rooms that you're not in, that might be really beneficial for your next opportunity, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a few guests on now, and the conversation around sponsorship has come up and really looking at that difference and understanding. And because I do think, because it wasn't even a term that was on my radar until not long ago, and I'd often thought of it, mentors, coaches, and leaders. But then when I discovered sponsor, I was like, oh wow, this is such a key part. Yes, it's one thing to be gleaning information and getting insights and stuff, which typically someone that wants that, draws in more than they need and gives themselves too much to think about. And then, but having someone that's actively going to, advocate for you, get you into the rooms that needs to hear your perspective and really give it weight. So like it can give so much weight to someone when they have the person that's opening the door, like they're essentially transferring all of their influence to that person in that moment to say what they're saying, I give it the same influence as what you give me. And that can be such a powerful thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess that leads me into the conversation that following when we were chatting in the lead up to this, you mentioned about the privilege wheel. And so I went away and I was looking at that and I was like, oh yeah, I'm pretty up there. Once I have a few more grey hairs on my head, then I'll probably even be right more smack bang in the middle. But so this had me thinking about that and what does it look like for someone in my position, I guess, to steward that position, and how do I play my part to be that sponsor, be the advocate, steward the privileges that I have. What would your thoughts and advice be to someone that's sitting in that position?
Yeah, and before I offer you any advice, I also want to acknowledge my own privilege too, because I mean, as you would have seen on that privilege wheel, there's a lot of parts of identity that are represented there. And when I look at that privilege wheel, and I sometimes use that privilege wheel when I'm coaching people to help them understand the concept of intersectionality, the fact that we all come with a range of identities. On that privilege wheel, I'm also really privileged. I'm white, I'm heterosexual, I'm middle class, I'm, educated, I speak English as a first language, all of those kinds of things. So my perspective is one perspective, I guess, is my point, and there'd probably be some other good perspectives to consider as well. So I mean, I think the first thing to know and to say is that privilege is something to acknowledge. I think people can feel a bit uncomfortable about the concept that they have, the reality really that they have privilege. And by nature of where we were born, when the family we were born into, the country we were born into, all of those sorts of things, and those things are things we can't change. And so it's how do we use the privilege that we have responsibly and meaningfully to support the voices of and actions of people who may not have access to that same level of privilege. So I guess I'm speaking to you because that was your question specifically for you, but I think anyone who sees that privilege wheel and sees that they have a lot of privilege, it's about being really thoughtful and intentional about recognizing the experience of other people in a system that you might be part of, and amplifying the experience and voices of other people in that system. So, we were talking earlier about like what might men might not know, or that might be going on in a system for women, but it also applies to being curious about the experience of a range of different identities as well. What's it like for someone from a different cultural background, someone who's Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, someone who's got a disability, or any of those kinds of things, someone whose first language is not English. What is their experience in your system? Be curious about that. Ask questions and listen, and also believe. So I think sometimes I've heard the experience of people being invited to share those experiences of theirs, sharing, but then going, oh, but no, it's not really like that, is it? Not being believed. So really being, I guess, open to sort of checking your biases and assumptions and kind of examining what you hear, and because sometimes it's not always easy to hear when, again, you think, how is this stuff happening in my organization, or if I'm a leader, how is it happening in my team? Being curious, listening, and then amplifying those voices, so giving those experiences an opportunity to be shared more widely. Going back to the sort of sponsorship piece, that's one example of how you can really advocate for and provide opportunity for people of different identities who may not have as much access to as much privilege or visibility as you. Yeah, there are a couple of ideas, I think. But yeah, I think overall the message is just to not to shy away from it. It's the reality that some of us have access to more privilege, and how do I use it in a responsible, meaningful, and intentional way to benefit more people than just myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is nothing worse than when someone asks for feedback and then they explain away every piece of what you try to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really powerful. The other thing that we got talking about was resilience, and I really appreciated your sort of the way that you talk about and define resilience. Would you be able to talk about resilience and how important that is in advancing our career and working through these different challenges that we face throughout our
Yeah.
career when we're going to the Netherlands and we're all over the place?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. So I think the really important thing that I'd like to change in the sort of popular narrative about resilience is that it looks like bouncing back from whatever happens to you. If you can bounce back and be, okay and get back to what you're doing, then that's resilience. Now, actually, that concept comes from the physical sciences. I learned, I didn't always know this, but I've learned, where a material can bounce back to its original form. And I think that's in the physical sciences known as resilience. But in a human context, um, resilience actually, I think, means being able to carry on, or actually take a break and care for yourself when things come up that are challenging. Being able to face those challenges with courage and care for yourself. So sometimes that does look like finding a way to persevere or carry on, but also sometimes that looks like recognizing that actually right now what I need to do for myself is to ask for some help or some support or look after myself in a way to sort of be able to top myself up to be able to step back into what I need to do. So in a career context, in a life context, really, like life is, full of challenges, and careers can be full of challenges. You get difficult feedback, you miss out on a role that you really wanted, your organization's going through a restructure, lots of potential things that can be challenging for people. So I think one of the things that's really helpful to build your resilience is to really to go back to that self-awareness piece that I was talking about in the personal leadership space. So, understanding yourself, understanding your emotions, when are they triggered? How do you often respond in difficult situations, and being able to regulate those emotions in those difficult situations. Also, that ability to be flexible. If we're too rigid in the way that we think about things, or we have expectations that things must work out or need to happen in a certain way, then that can really set ourselves up for challenge. Feeling like things are not working out the way that we want. So having some flexibility in the way that we think about things, the way that we approach things, can contribute to that resilience, and allow us to just to be able to navigate those challenges that come up. So there are a couple of things which I think are really really important. And resilience is a huge thing in life and in career. And Yeah, being able to. Well, actually, I think the other really important thing to say is it's not a trait. So it's not something that you either have or that you don't have. Like, oh, that person's so resilient, that person's not very resilient. It's actually a set of skills and capabilities that you can build up over time. So if you feel like, oh, I'm not very resilient, you know, you don't need to sort of give up in the sense that you can actually build those capabilities and build your resilience if you feel like that's something that would be beneficial for you.
Mm. The flexibility piece is vital in my mind for thinking about how do you grow and build a career, because I guess my big message is around taking ownership of your career. But I use ownership deliberately instead of control. People often say take control of your career. there's so many factors of our life and career that are completely out of our control. We don't get to decide whether the boss turns out to be a complete jerk or if they turn out to be great, and how that affects you then, will affect you. And it's our ability then, like, so many people will have this picture of this perfect career that they're holding out in front of themselves. And as soon as something that happens that shatters that, it shatters your whole view of what your career was going to be, and that can be devastating versus if you can hold your life and career with a bit of an open hand and being able to be flexible with the twists and turns that it takes. And you might still have a direction you're trying to move, but you're also open to the new inputs that allow you to maybe keep tweaking and adjusting and for the life stages that you're in and the life that you want to have.
Absolutely.
Flexibility and resilience are this very intertwined.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I've learnt and continue to learn some of these lessons myself, so I don't in any way want to pitch myself as being fully evolved in all of these things. Like that's definitely a lesson that has come up multiple times. Like I started out with some pretty set ideas of how I wanted my career and my life to go, and of course life gets in the way, and things happen that mean that it doesn't turn out as you might have planned. So there's a lot of opportunity for growth in that as well. I think resilience is also learning from the challenges, so taking an opportunity to reflect on, like, I felt really challenged when this thing happened. Like, what's that about? Getting curious about yourself and your own responses. And, am I getting hooked on something, or is there something, like, if something like that happens again, is there something that I can do differently? Really, like, everything is fodder in my mind anyway. Everything is fodder for learning and growth. And if you build a practice of self-reflection, then of course you can do self-reflection yourself. I think it's also great to do it with someone else, like a coach. Then there's such richness in all the experiences that you might have in your career.
Yeah, absolutely. Kate, thanks so much for being on today. How can people find you and get in touch?
Look, the best place to find me currently is on LinkedIn. Look me up. I'd be really happy to connect with people, and I'm always love to connect with people who are doing interesting things or wanting to make change in the world, even if it's in a really different way than what I'm doing. So I'd love to connect with people there.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks for tuning in to Kinda Planned. Subscribe and send this episode to a friend that you think needs to hear it. Or head to my website, www.kindaplan.com.au for free resources. Or follow me on LinkedIn and socials so that we can keep the conversation going. Now go unlock your next opportunity.